Okay, so next up, we've got our fireside chat. I'd like to welcome Major General John Wharton. General Wharton served in the U.S. Army for nearly 3 decades, recently retired, and served as the commanding general for the United States Army Research, Development, and Engineering Command, which is now the Combatant Capabilities Development Command for the Army Futures Command. This conversation is going to be led by Jake Kramer, who is the managing partner at FedTech. So Jake, General John Wharton, welcome. The floor is now yours.
All right, thanks, Mike. Thanks for having us. Welcome, General Wharton.
Thanks, Jake. Thanks, everyone at Ensign. Mike, thank you.
Excellent. Well, General Wharton, this is thanks again for being here. It's great to talk to you again, and I think we have a really good audience here that could learn a lot from your experiences. So I'm going to start it off with a question about the ecosystem right now between DoD and the startup ecosystem. So we as a nation are really enjoying this direct interaction between DoD and the startups. At this point, you started many years ago on this effort. Can you just share a little bit of history about that early interaction and what your role was?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, Jake. And thanks again for everyone for allowing me to come and talk a little bit here. When we talk about accelerators and we talk about startups and all, a lot of people don't know, Jake, that the Army has really had startups that started way back in 2003. And then that time it was called really the Army Venture Capital Initiative. It really had 2 goals at that time in 2003. It was to review and look for innovative power solutions and also look at energy technologies. So that was the goal for the military. But the second part of that was really to have a return on investment, right? And bring something back. So there was an economic part of that. That process started, concept was created in 2003, it kind of evolved in 2004, and then it started getting up and running in 2005. It was really seeded with $25 million, it became about 100 million, and it brought in about 13 companies that I believe at that time, they were able to get about 6-fold on the return of investment. So as you're looking at what you're doing right now at Ensign and NDIA and all those things, there's great parallels. And a lot of those companies that, had 6 times return on their investments, that a lot of them, were bought by Motorola, by Apple, by Google, were some of the initial capabilities. So over time, that initial fund started, and it used to fall under a lot of the roles and activities that I had in the command when I was at the Research and Development Engineering Command, because we had all the scientists, engineers, and a lot of those programs. But it really started way back in 2003 with the initial concept that moved forward. And then as it moved forward, it was modeled after In-Q-Tel. And that was the Army's kind of base that said, hey, there's this thing out there called In-Q-Tel, and let's look at that. So the venture fund ran about probably about 10, 12 years. In that time, a company called On Point Technologies was the leader in that. And again, the scientists and engineers oversaw that, and my entities oversaw that from different roles I played. When I was at Army Material Command, I kind of got the science and technology put under me, and then through other commands and deployments, and then ultimately at RDE-Com from that standpoint. But then you saw in about 2015, you saw a lot of the accelerators, which of course I was in command at that time, and we're kind of shaping. And a couple of the people that I think were very instrumental in that were folks like Will Roper. He was over on OSD. He was the SCO at that time, the Strategic Capabilities Office. We were supporting him from the military standpoint. At that time, it was General Iorardi, General McMaster, myself. We all had different roles from the Army component. And Dr. Roper really thought some great inventions out there, and we were looking at how does he get funded to do that. And then we started seeing all those other accelerators come out, the AFWorks, the SoftWorks, all the different accelerators came out. Now, in the meantime, we were trying to get the word, even before that, out that we needed these things to cover down the gaps. And you can imagine, just like anything, when you're attacking bureaucracy, how much resistance you get. But now you're up, you're running, you're doing a great service. The folks that are out here briefing will contribute to the national security mission. So it's very, very important where we are at this time.
Okay, and you talked a lot about spin in, so taking technologies that are outside of the government to bring in to help the DoD specifically. That's hard enough. What the DIA is doing is trying to do both, and that's the spin out and the spin in. So
That's
taking
right.
technology out of the DoD labs. Can you talk about what that was like, the tech transfer activities in the early 2000s?
Yeah, and that was pretty much almost like a commercial model in the early 2000s, Jake. It wasn't having to go through all the different regulations that are occurring now, and the FARs and the funding. So the money was set aside to do that acceleration in those days, and then in today's days, we have all the funding that's now in the POM or in the budget, and that's down to the services, to the accelerators to help speed that up. So, but the thing I'd say is a little bit of a couple of thoughts there, is that as you look at the future and you look at where you are and what are the needs of the nation and the country and the services, you got to keep in mind the difference between the science, the technology, and the capability. People get those mixed up, and it goes back to TRL levels, and it goes back to who do you enter as a new company. So that's where DIA and Ensign are so huge, of helping navigate the channels and get to the right point, so you don't lose time, effort, resources for those younger companies.
Yeah, and pivoting over to Ensign. Previously, you were involved when Ensign, the prior iteration was called MD5, and they were a small outfit. Now it's expanded significantly in the past few years, as has entrepreneurship across the country. Specifically with the pandemic, has caused the biggest boon in entrepreneurship in a very long time. What do you envision the impact of Ensign's mission in the next 10 years, given all this momentum we have?
Well, I think it's huge, and I like how it's evolved, because MD5 started with a hackathon in New York City, right around, I forgot the year that it started, maybe about 2016 or somewhere around there. But it was more a hackathon, and it was more subject related. But where you are now, to the network and establishing the network, is where your power will come from. That ecosystem where you can draw on the best from the public-private partnerships, from industry, from academia, and from everyone, and then taking these companies and then helping them navigate, is very huge. But a lot of the success on some of those early transitions was on Stryker, and some of the insertions that we would spiral into Stryker, and the Stryker brigade combat teams and things of that nature too, Jake. But I like where you're postured now, how you evolve over time. Sometimes it takes an organization to evolve over time, to work through the tactics, the techniques, and procedures. And I think we're seeing that a little bit with the Futures Command. Everyone is very hard and critical on the Futures Command. But my goodness, it's been an organization that's been up, 2 or 3 years? Let it settle. Let it get into their rhythm. They got great leaders. They're going to do well. We got to work the tactics, techniques, procedures, bounce those with the Army staff. Everything will be okay if we can get there.
Yeah, yeah, I mean that's you mentioned a lot of really important things there, and thinking about the DIA program, we've seen 9 companies already formed this year, and more to come. You talked about getting them connected with DoD as being one of the biggest challenges, but how about the advice? So what would you give these 9 companies and the more that are going to be forming over the next few weeks to months to not just grow their business, but also help the warfighter in the future?
Well, one of the things that I think is very important here is and it's again, a lot of just like you're doing now with DIA, right? You're really looking at dual use technologies, because you may get that contract, and the beauty of what DIA is doing is you're helping navigate, right? So many small companies in my time, and still as I help them and nations in technologies, they don't know where to go, and they lose a lot of time and resources. So your sponsorship, your mentorship is going to help those companies out tremendously and to navigate, but you still have to have a business model. So you can't just be reliant on the government it may help you get started. It may help you get that contract, that SBIR phase 1, phase 2, and then follow on. But you still want to have the ability to market that depending on all the ITARs and all that and the patents, but bring that back to the commercial sector, because you got to have a business model that's going to be self-sustaining. So it's not just delivering the capability, it's becoming self-sustaining in the future. So don't focus on one line of effort. Think about how you establish your business model and move forward.
That's great advice. And the last time we talked, we were talking about different pathways that are non-traditional. So everybody knows SBIR, but there's also organizations out there within the government that are not as front and center and as obvious. We mentioned the efforts in New York City. Can you talk through some of those things that I think people would be surprised to hear what else is going on there?
Well, I think there's a lot of accelerators and other programs that folks don't know. Like for example, right now, and Jake, and I hope this is somewhat on target. We're coming on the end of the fiscal year, right? And there's going to be money that is going to be needed to be spent. So if I were talking to companies like these kind of companies, I'd be talking to the Army Research Office, and I'd be talking to some of the contracting centers as one, because for basic and extramural research, the Army Research Office, that's part of now Army Futures Command, is taking and trying to fill a lot of requests and proposals. The second thing that you may want to consider at this point are, what are the unsolicited proposals that you could submit based on requirements? So some of you that may be in the energy field, you can also, even though this is National Security Innovation Network, there are opportunities in the commercial markets like unsolicited proposals for the Department of Energy, for those of you in energy. There's other ones in transportation for those of you that may have been talking about different autonomous systems and things of that nature. So there's other government activities that have funding capabilities that are in line or, in addition to what you're seeing here from that standpoint. And so a couple thoughts there, just real quick, Jake.
Yeah, that's great. And you talked about reaching out to folks in the DoD, and some of the feedback we've gotten previously, and it's gotten a lot better. But if you're trying to reach out to an end user, let's say, who's not in a position where they're, they have the ability to assess technology or even have a pilot or anything like that, what kind of advice would you give to people who are trying to hit their end users who are going to give the feedback they need to help develop their technology? How do we lower the defenses?
Yeah, well, I think so. Again, one point is again understanding where you're at in the process, right? Science, technology, capability. So when you get to be a TRL 4, 5, or 6, you're going to be addressing the combat capabilities, the CC, the DevComs, research and development engineering centers. You're out of the basic and applied for the Army Research Lab. But now you're into or two of the Naval Research Lab or AFRL, but now you're into the development, the design. So that has a certain client and personnel that you want to go to and reach out to, for example. So it's knowing where you have to go and who you have to talk to. And now each one of those offices have an ombudsman that you can go to. Each one of those offices had an office of small business. So as you're all starting up, don't be afraid to reach out. They're all published. If you go to their home pages and their webs, you'll have to dig for it, but you'll see either Office of Small Business, C5ISR Center has a technical exchange or information exchange. TIM, I forgot what the acronym is, but that's where you can go, and that's what their jobs are, is to help you bring your technologies forward and to see those labs, because the key is, as you get the great support from DIA and get you weaved in, it's when you get to the big Army where you get a contract. So you go from the science, the technology, capability. Once you develop your capability, you start getting a TRL 8 and 9, You're going to throw it over the fence when the Army sees a requirement for that capability so they can go out and put a contract out and put it into the acquisition process, or they're going to spiral that technology into a PM shop or a CFT. Once that happens, then you're starting to get where there's going to be greater returns than just the SIBR functions, but those offices within those CCDCs, within the different research centers of the services have ombudsmans or interfaces, small business offices that's their job to exist to help you sort through that and get into those activities.
That's great, great advice there, John. So kind of an open-ended question here, but if you had a magic wand and you could wave it, and I know you're no longer in the government, but if you had a magic wand, you wave it, what would you like to see happen more from a commercialization standpoint in order to catalyze more companies feeding the DoD great solutions?
Well, it's a great question, and let me start with DIA and what you're trying to do there. So as you continue to evolve and sponsor younger companies, and you'll increase your volume or the funnel here, you're not just looking at. I would ask you to maybe you sponsor companies, but you also look at some of the work that's being done at universities in the public-private partnerships, right? And in industry. So you have big industry, they know to work the ropes. You have small business here. Make sure that all these companies know what other criteria they fall under, if they're small business, innovative, if they're service disabled, veteran owned, all those kind of categories. But there's a lot in some of the individual briefings. There's a lot of great studying and work that you can go and talk to universities to help you refine your product. The other thing I think you need to do as small companies is you need to go talk to those labs from the services, because they are open and willing, and depending on what you're going to discuss, whether you need a CRADA or not, you're going to get a lot of insight. One of the stories I was with, and I'll give you a true story, I had Senator Duckworth ask me to go out to look at one of her companies in Chicago, and I looked at all the different technologies there, and I said, well, in a kind, gentle way, I said, well, I need to link you up with my C5ISR lab, because we're already a couple generations beyond where you're at. And actually, we were 3 generations beyond where that at. Now, I don't want to mention the company, but I want you to know that you can get some insider notes by talking to those scientists and engineers in those functional areas of where you play. And batteries, I heard the part of the batteries, the Army Research Lab battery is one of the foremost in the nation, right? So go talk to them, hear what they're saying, what they're working on, whether it's hard, solid, lightweight, what kind of materials are they using. Gives you a little insight so you cannot waste money and finances or on something that may become, you may be able to go to the next generation. So anyways, Jay, just a couple quick points.
Yeah, thanks. And you mentioned CRADA in there. I want to be mindful of people who may not be familiar with this kind of language here in the audience. Can you just explain what that is, what that process is like, and what it stands for too?
Well, I mentioned that you could interact with the research centers, the labs, and things of that nature. A lot of times when you bring a disruptive or a technology that is of value, you can enter into a cooperative research and development agreement. That's called a CRADA. The acronym is CRADA. And there's different forms for the CRADA depending on your technology and what you're bringing forward. Some are just information exchanges. Some are on the more developed, may ask you to sign, some agreement. Sometimes the CRADAs can be good. I had over 1,500 different CRADAs with universities, 1,000 with industry, and 500 with other DoD labs, because that's of companies like you have here, Jake, that are coming back and wanting to do business. So what you have to think about is your patents. You have to think about what you want to retain, because some of those will say, hey, we want to own your patent, or we want to own the license. So depending on the technology. So you have to, it's kind of a discussion point, but it's an open-ended cooperative agreement, and you get to help shape that and define what you feel comfortable with and what you would like to do.
Yeah, I think that's really important to mention, because a lot of people don't even recognize that they can work with the scientists and engineers and researchers at labs, or let alone talk to them. So, this is just a really fantastic way to work on something jointly and develop a technology into a product that you could license and own. So, really, really important things for the audience to know. So we're coming towards the end of our discussion, but is there anything else that you wanted to add in there and let everybody know? Any words of wisdom from your experience, or anything else that you'd like to share?
Well, I think for young companies, stay focused, have a good business model in addition to what you're doing, understand all the different conduits working with DIA that you can get to the right folks. And remember that what you're doing for DIA and that is you're helping the country in national security. So Ensign is not going to go away. It'll just get stronger, and so will DIA just get stronger because of the ecosystem you create. Your power's in the ecosystem and the network and the relationships you have. Stay focused on your product. Don't go left or right. Here's my product. Here's the capability. Sometimes you want to think about partnering with another disruptive technology, because the combination of the two gives you a little bit of advantage versus the one each. I'll see anytime I'll have on my plate probably 50 to 75 cyber companies. How do you make them different? How do you distinguish? Well, if I combine it with AI, I combine it with this other function, I may have something disruptive. Jake, I think,
I think we had the last in the X-Tech search program from the Army. The last winners of that cohort combined actually two companies in one, if I'm correct, or maybe they're the runner-up. So it was great to see that. Well, it looks like we're out of time. I see Mike coming on stage here. So General Wharton, thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and sharing your wisdom with everybody. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, Jake. Thanks, Mike.
All right, so General Wharton, Jake, really appreciate the discussion. The insight is encouraging, and we look forward to continue the advancement of technology through the startup ecosystem and ultimately to help the warfighter down the road. So thank you for that insight here today.